Hello and welcome. I'm Siddhartha Talya, and this is another in the series of special shows that we at Times Network have been bringing to you to raise awareness about the rights of news publishers and the need for fair compensation in an age where many believe that AI portals are getting away with copyright infringement while training their large language models using data and information generated by content creators. Now, while there is widespread consensus among several stakeholders that there ought to be compensation paid, and as far as the publishers are concerned, this is imperative, the specific mechanism through which this ought to be achieved is also the subject of a raging debate. That's our focus on today's show that we're calling Publishers versus AI, the licensing debate. Now, this debate is evolving here in India as well and also across the world. Many news publishers and organizations have entered into voluntary licensing agreements with AI developers in different parts of the world. Publishers like the Associated Press, The Atlantic, Shutterstock, News Corp, Condé Nast, Le Monde have licensing agreements with OpenAI. Google has one with Associated Press. Microsoft has one with Axel Springer. So in this framework, each copyright owner negotiates an agreement with an AI company for the sharing of data at an agreed upon price. The other mechanism is the collective licensing model. It entails the formation of an organization or a body which negotiates licenses collectively. And this organization or body or collective in turn will distribute royalties to copyright owners. Typically, it means that there's one license for multiple copyrighted works belonging to different owners or publishers. In India, there are around 4 copyright societies that exist, and Section 33 of the Copyright Act provides for this. The EU, Australia, as well as Germany are some jurisdictions where such a licensing model is prevalent. Now, here in India, news publishers, media organizations, and technology companies have been engaging with the government, and the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade formed a committee to look into the multiple dimensions of this debate around publisher rights. Now, that committee has published a working paper in December last year where it recommended what it calls a hybrid model that it also describes as one nation, one license, one payment. Now, this working paper acknowledges the right to fair compensation, but it also backs a mandatory blanket license for AI developers. And very interestingly, it says the rights holders will not have the option to withhold their works from use in the training of AI systems, stop quote. A centralized non-profit entity made by rights holders and designated by the central government will collect payments from AI developers, and then royalties would be allocated to copyright owners. The royalty rates would be fixed by a committee appointed by the government. Now, for a news organization, this is seriously problematic in more ways than one. Some say that this appears to be a one-size-fits-all approach that's being recommended, which reduces flexibility for news publishers. It appears to be prioritizing AI innovation over and above the rights of publishers. It may also erode editorial control as well as autonomy of news organizations over the content that they create. Mandatory licensing means that my content is essentially out of my hands and the AI portal can use it in any which way that it deems fit. On the other hand, between the publisher and the AI developer or company addresses the issue of editorial autonomy as well as commercial autonomy. Now, these are all pressing questions and topics that we will now throw open to our guests to deliberate further in this discussion. I'm being joined right now by Kanishk Agarwal, technology and AI expert, who was also with us last week for a similar discussion, albeit on a different aspect of this raging debate. We also have Mr. Kumar Rajgopalan, Vice President of Dexian. Kanwaljit Kaur Soni joins us, President of the Global Association of Forensic Accountants and cyber policy expert as well. And Maz Ansari also joins us, co-founder of Oriserve. Many thanks for all our guests. And let's begin this. Let me go across to Kanishk Agarwal. Now, Kanishk, ad tech was an issue that we discussed the last time round, but this time we're talking about the different models of licensing that are prevalent. Now, many news organizations in their correspondences with the government as well as otherwise have actually pitched for direct negotiations between publishers as well as AI developers. The working paper of the DPIIT however, recommends a hybrid model where there would be a parallel structure that would be put in place to negotiate collectively with AI developers. That particular entity will then, of course, disperse royalties to the various members, including, of course, news publishers as well as content creators. Where do you stand on this evolving discussion about what the ideal model ought to be?
I think it's a very difficult topic. I think there is a very thin line here. Uh, See, when you look into the committee, they have evaluated 5 different models, and voluntary licensing was rejected outrightly.
Yes.
Because there is no scalability for that. But when it comes to when we're talking about implementations of DPDP Act and others, and intellectual property is my right. It's a fundamental question as well, right? Because we have our own fundamental rights as a citizen. So where years of work and the intellectual property, I give it to an AI model, and there is no model from a compensation perspective. So when it comes to commercialization, how will I differentiate my intellectual property versus the other intellectual property? And I think this is a very, I think it's not a mature move from an Indian ecosystem perspective, because if you talk about industry scale, innovation, and others, that's what NESCOM is debating on, right? Because there has been restriction.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the intellectual owners, I think that's a big dent on that, because outrightly the access will be given, and there is no framework that has been designed. The problem is that globally, there is no consensus that has come from a legal architecture perspective and others. Yeah.
No, you're right about the fact that there's no global consensus, so to speak, but purely from a media organization perspective, we believe that some kind of a hybrid body that negotiates fixed rates and takes away the autonomy of a media organization over the content that it generates actually jeopardizes independent journalism as well as access and creation of that kind of content. So that's a no-go area. However, as far as voluntary licensing models are concerned, they're quite prevalent in countries like the United States. And we have actually just listed out several such models that actually exist in the US, among a whole host of other countries as well, where there are direct negotiations between one particular publisher or media organization with an AI developer, where fair compensation is paid and the kind of content that will be shared is also agreed upon. So let me take this across to Kumar Rajgopalan as well. Where do you stand on this entire debate, sir?
No, I think the first and foremost, the discussion right now, which is happening.
Yes.
AI itself is a very new chapter. So, which means that most of us still did not understand the potential destruction which is going to happen in the creative world. So it's becoming a new one for every one of us. It's actually underlying the fact that we are not in the safe zone. Everybody is debating based on certain presumptive analysis. And I think probably over a period of time, it would mature. So it's a right step towards at least bringing a committee, bringing a certain amount of concept notes so that people can understand what is the gamut of the change that would happen in the future. That's one part of it. The second part of it, it's always there is a question behind the creative world, which is currently happening independently of any other systems and any other behaviors. The creators all across been there for quite some time, 2,000, 2,500 years, bringing out a lot of materials around that one. But the AI at this point of time, just crumbling everything to that within 1 year, bringing out a new creative world altogether, which even destroying the basic fundamentals of the creative ideas which are being generated.
Yes.
So with that being said, definitely is there is a fair usage which everybody is talking about, not in terms of compensation alone. Yes. Fair usage in terms of how the creative world should work typically. What are the parameters within the fair usage, which means that even a creative content created by AI, if it is to be used by any other AI company, are they really creating the creative from its own, or is it created from somebody's creative work, just kind of added certain flavors into it and creative a new thing? If that is the case, then what happens is that the AI companies can make a lot of profits, and at some point of time it becomes unmanageable for any of the individuals to compete against those AI companies. So which means the fair analysis at this point of time is not just about the compensation alone. It's about the usage of it in future, how they are planning to use that word. So that brings the AI companies also, the content creators also, and the government to sit together, make it for further more analysis on this subject.
For the benefit of our viewers, what has now been published by the DPIIT, at least so far in December 2025, was part one of a working paper. So presumably negotiations will continue. There'll be a lot of back and forth between all the stakeholders involved as well. Let me take this across to Ms. Soni as well. Ms. Soni, now the committee believes that there are certain issues with respect to transaction costs, etc., that a voluntary licensing model brings in, which might work to the detriment of AI developers. But the contrarian view here is that there are a matter of copyright rights as far as the news publishers are concerned that also ought to be protected, that a fair compensation ought to be paid, and that whoever is deliberating and eventually deciding on these matters cannot be prioritizing the rights of AI developers over and above that of media organizations and news publishers. What's your take?
Correct. So everybody says that data is a new oil. Seems like, the AI companies really want to drill down to that oil and they don't want to pay enough for it. So the problem here is that AI companies are using high quality contents because each time AI models are being trained, they have to get trained on high level of content, high quality of content. So at one point, we have a publishers who have a availability of high quality content. At the same time, AI company wants to use that because each time data models work, the AI model work, it has to get into depth of the data, and then only they'll be able to give the right quality of output. So simply put, the way everybody says that garbage in and garbage out. So AI models cannot go through the basic level of data. But when it comes to compensation, these AI agents do not work in a linear way. They do not look at a specific book or a movie or a content or an article. They go through the multiple data sets, millions of data sets. They look at the transaction pattern and then they analyze it and then they give the output. So let's say if 500 publishers or creators have given the content, how will they get paid? What would be the proportion of the payment? Let's say my content is far superior or high quality than the ABC. So will that proportion work? What would be the proportion of that payment? So that's exactly where there's a lot of lack of transparency at that stage.
Okay.
And that needs to be definitely addressed. There's an act which is called Fair Use in US. Similar act, we also have a fair dealing as per Copyright
it's part
Act
of the Copyrights Act of 1957. You're right. Yes.
Correct. So Section 52 talks about fair dealing. And this fair dealing is very restrictive. The exemptions are allowed, but in a very, very restrictive form. For example, it can be used for research, private research. These AI model training and this voluntary licensing will fit into that kind of, copyright Section 52.
Correct.
That's another question which is still not very clear.
That is true. And in fact, we did debate the entire issue of fair use as well as fair dealing 2 weeks ago. And I think it's quite clear at this juncture, at least, that the defense that a lot of AI developers are offering, that their actions actually amount to fair use or fair dealing, these have actually been debunked in some foreign jurisdictions, including in the Eastern District Court of Virginia not too long ago, in a case involving one of the big tech companies as well. Suffice it to say that there are enough jurisdictions where that particular defense has actually been successfully countered on the part of news publishers. We'll come to that as well, but let me take this across to Maaz Ansari too. And Maaz, this is what a lot of people have a problem with the so-called hybrid model that has been recommended in this working paper. It says that rights holders will not have the option to withhold their works from use in the training of AI systems. Doesn't this directly militate against the autonomy of news publishers and media organizations over the content that they create and have a copyright over?
Well, it does, but I'll take off from where all of you left off. The biggest problem I think that exists today is the dichotomous situation that has been presented in US courts, right? In one of the cases where Ross Intelligence was going against Thomson Reuters for the usage of legal head notes, the courts ruled in the favor of Thomson Reuters, saying that work was actually reproduced because Ross Intelligence was a competitor, right? At the same time, multiple cases that have come across against Anthropic and OpenAI on the usage of copyrighted books. Right?
Correct.
Those cases, the entire objection was reprimanded, and the courts ruled in the favor of these AI companies because they ended up saying that the books were used to teach the system's language patterns, and not to really.
No, go ahead, Maz. I just want to make a very brief interruption since you mentioned Anthropic and the entire episode involving the dissemination of books, because a lot of authors had actually got together and taken Anthropic to court. And what was unprecedented in that specific case that you mentioned is the fact that there was a massive settlement that was agreed upon between the authors and Anthropic, because Anthropic, it was found in its back-end operations while training the data, had relied on downloading a lot of pirated copies of these books. So they were illegally procured, and that put Anthropic in a difficult position when it came to this particular case in courts, as a result of which there was a settlement eventually agreed upon. This is just for the benefit of our viewers to essentially tell them what happened in that case. Continue, Maz.
That's right. So the whole settlement was against the pirated books used, right? Not really on how the content was used. The court still ruled in their favor. So when you get such deeply mixed signals, right, from the highest authority in any country, that leaves everyone scrambling, right? So now there is one alternative that, okay, every case goes to court. There is a lot of uncertainty. So we are looking at very long drawn legal processes that go on where there are no defined set of rules to play by, correct? This forms the basis and the urgency for creating these models that we speak about, right? And see 3 or 4 models that we've been exposed to by running an AI company. So one is obviously the flat fee deals, right? Or the one-time deals between News Corp and a Meta or an NYT and Anthropic that happened, right? And Amazon, sorry, which works really well for people like you who have high-value archives, right? And that clearly leaves the long tail of all your indie journalists, freelancers, people who are doing smaller boutique setups. They get covered under the collective licensing fee that you spoke about. However, Perplexity recently launched a revenue-based model where they're actually selling a $5 subscription and saying that, okay, if your work is cited as a part of the answer or for the completion of a task, then 80% of the revenue comes to you, and 20% is what Perplexity keeps, right? Now, all of these models are definitely hazy, right? There is no clear path because, like Ma'am also said, that there are a lot of attribution issues, right? If I deem or perceive my work to be higher value, what happens in that case? So a hybrid model, I feel, that protects people with high value archives through a one-time deal works for publishers like you. While I feel that somewhere the indie or the boutique shops will have to fold into a collective licensing scheme. Otherwise, the scale of it becomes unmanageable. However, one important point that is being missed in this debate entirely, right, is that there is a problem with Google, the way it functions today. So Google combines its search crawler and its AI training crawler into one single unit, which means that if, let's say, you want to opt out of their AI training, you effectively become invisible to Google. So you have to opt out of the search results as well. Microsoft has separated both of these systems to actually show that an alternative model exists, right?
So it's very much a work in progress, at least in the Indian context. I'll 30 seconds to each of our panelists. Kanishk, where do you think this is all headed? Because in India, at least, the debate appears to be still in its infancy, as opposed to a more advanced stage in a lot of other Western nations in particular. Where is this all headed, Kanishk? 30 seconds to each guest.
I think it's almost impossible to trace which piece of content is contributed and how much to a specific output. So from an India perspective, what they're trying to attempt is really unprecedented. And it's a mandatory blanket licensing system with no opt-out and guaranteed royalties. So I think if this gets successful, then it becomes a global standard.
Well, I'm sure there'll be pushback to that recommendation that's been made. Mr. Rajgopalan, your view?
I think probably in future there will be a differential pricing, one for the training. A lot more small language models emerge in India because we don't have that scale at this point of time to compete with the larger companies. So I think probably India will have its own content based delivery with a differential pricing.
All right. What is absolute priority as far as news organizations is concerned is journalistic freedom and editorial independence. Do you see a very workable middle ground, Ms. Soni? What's your view?
Correct. So I think opting out will definitely impact the biasness in AI agent. So there has to be a transparent model where the proper royalties should be given and attribution should be given that this particular author's work has been used for this particular work, and those authors should be aware of it. There's a black box should be removed.
Attribution and fair compensation. Final word, Maaz Ansari.
Yeah, so I think finally the ANI, there's an ongoing case around this, right? Something we track. So the ANI media versus the OpenAI case, which came to the courts on the 1st of April, will be something that everyone is watching because obviously India's approach of a blanket licensing, right, which is how broadcasting generally functions, is up for debate. So it's always a wait and watch is what I would say. There are different models being proposed, but there is some more time till we actually see this converging in a very, into a direction that appeals to everyone.
Let's evolve a model where the rights and freedoms and autonomy of news publishers and content creators and media organizations are preserved intact. I think the sanctity of that ought to be respected. At least that's an emerging consensus. We'll wait and see as to how the deliberations with all the stakeholders, including the government, now progress here in India. Many thanks to all our guests for participating in this very interesting and engaging debate. Thank you.